Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Farewell Evangelion, the Neon Genesis Evangelion podcast, where we go through the series bit by bit. My name is Keith, going through for his last time, and as always, I'm joined by Peter.
Hello.
Who is going through for his first. So today, we're doing another episode, not on any specific volume or release, but instead we're actually going to go through some of the fan theories, conspiracies, or just general misconceptions of the franchise.
Fan theory. Gendo, not a good father.
I think that's a misconception.
Yeah, that might be a misconception. He's actually a great father.
Yeah, and a great boss, too.
Yeah. In fact, if you refer to some of our earlier podcast episodes, I believe I referred to Gendo as potentially one of the better dads in fiction.
Yep. Or the best.
Or potentially just the best.
But yeah, for this one, we're just going to discuss and go over some of the general ones that are known. We'll start off with a lot more common ones, but then we'll work our way into some of the more obscure, not-known ones. And of course, if you happen to have a theory that you don't hear us mention you would like us to talk about, or anything like that specifically, send us a message.
We will dedicate an entire podcast to your one individual theory. It'll be a 5-minute podcast.
I don't know if it's going to be a long one. Depending on what the thing is.
You give us a complicated enough podcast, and we'll dissect it. Not podcast. Give us a complicated enough theory. We'll dissect it.
So I guess we just jump right in, start going through some of the stuff. I'm curious to see if you have any of these theories, or it might have been things you even thought about that it's like, oh, so other people think that way.
Nope, I've been smooth-brained this entire time.
Fair enough. They just glide now.
Yeah.
So the first theory is a very popular theory from End of Evangelion specifically. And it hasn't really come up much since, but definitely in the early 2000s it was one that was discussed a lot. And that is that at the end of Evangelion, Asuka's pregnant. So the idea behind this is it's going full on Adam and Eve type of mentality stuff. And the word she uses at the end of I feel sick or how disgusting, the translation in Japanese is a term used for morning sickness.
Fair.
So that, mixed with all the context, people believe is supposed to be implying that Asuka is pregnant with the next line of humanity after the events of End of Evangelion.
Awful. I don't like... I mean, I don't disagree necessarily. I don't like to think more about that theory. I would like for this to be all of the thinking I do about that theory.
Well, you said your brain's too smooth to hold on to it.
It's good, it's gone. Smooth brain protection. Works every time.
So that's definitely one of the more common ones that are known, but again, it kind of all but disappeared by the time anything else came out.
Good, for the best.
Yeah. Another one that's a pretty fun one is one we've discussed already ourselves, and that is the apparitions of Rei, also known as quantum rays.
Yep.
And that is that all of the ghostly rays we see throughout the series is actually the Lilith form projecting, glancing through time.
Yeah. Checking up on Shinji and other things, but mostly Shinji.
Yeah, and that also ties into another theory that, the time loops, which is that until the first instrumentality happens, and Lilith is formed into her godlike state, the apparitions cannot exist beforehand, which is why she doesn't show up at the beginning of the manga, but shows up in every other iteration.
Yeah. I'll get to... When we get into the more out there fan theories, I now have my own personal fan theory I want to add into things. But we'll get there.
I know how I feel about you already establishing that it's an out there fan theory.
I know enough about myself to know that any theory I have is an out there fan theory.
Another popular one that started with the end of the manga series, but also Rebuild kind of almost solidified, is the idea of multiple timelines or looping timelines.
Yeah.
So the multiple timelines, obviously the big difference between that and the looping timelines is everyone believes it's the same characters reincarnating and going through the same steps over and over again in a loop. Whereas the multiple timeline theory is all the stories are happening at the exact same time in their own universe.
And it's just the little differences are them branching off into different things.
Yeah, and neither one really is proven or disproven. The main focus for the loop one is the beginning of Rebuild has things left over that are clearly an homage to the end of Evangelion. So the seas being red and always been red since Second Impact. The outline that looks to be of an MPE at the beginning.
Yeah.
How we're talking about going through this multiple times.
Oh, the third child again.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Whereas the multiple timeline theory explains that, yes, they're all canon, which, because of the depths at the end of Thrice Upon a Time, the Golgoth object, which is outside of time, that's kind of the basis for it being infinite timelines and not necessarily a loop.
Fair. I can see that. That is kind of the main theory I have been operating under since we got partway through Rebuild.
Yeah, and I think that's natural. People will fall for Rebuild, is that one of those two is going to be your assumption. And if you have an extensive experience with Evangelion, I think people tend to fall more towards the loop theory because of those clear homages at the beginning of Rebuild. Whereas I think if it's just a general understanding of the series, you'll start thinking it's more of timelines because they kind of mention timelines in the Rebuild storyline.
Also, for me personally, I find the timelines and branching all that stuff to be a more intuitive way of thinking about it, because like lots of stories that have different timelines or different universes with similar things talk about it from that perspective of branching timelines with choices, whereas the loop thing is not something that a lot of people or a lot of different versions of fiction really use.
Well, that's why I said it's the people who are more heavily invested in Evangelion before it happened fall more into that one. And that's also because Ono himself was not really helping, I guess, in that sense, because he's been multiple times like, oh, Evangelion's a story about loops.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, the metaphorical, cycle of things where, father does something and then the son is doing the exact same thing. Or, Misato, Kaji, and Ritsuko pretty much doing something that is passed on to the kids and all that stuff. Like the endless cycles of things.
Yeah.
But no, it was literal, I guess. The loop of Evangelion.
Yeah.
It's an actual time loop. Shinji's trapped this whole time.
Well, it's like if you look at those astronomical diagrams of the moon orbiting the Earth while the Earth orbits the sun and the sun orbits the giant black hole at the center of our universe. It's loops within loops within loops, baby. There's always loops all the way down.
It's all loops.
Yeah. Not only are there the giant overarching story loops where it goes from one timeline to the next, one after the other, there's also the interior loops of Gendo being a bad father, which leads to all Shinji making similar choices to Gendo. But then there's the even lower level of loops of Shinji eating SpaghettiOs. Those are loops.
Fruit Loops? Cheerios?
Yeah. You don't notice because you're not paying close enough attention, but every time Shinji eats food, it's loop-based food.
How far does this go?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think usually people fall into one of the two. Really, neither one is confirmed or denied. We may never have it confirmed or denied, but at the very least, the story that's presented implies that one of the two is a fact.
Yeah. It's less so a theory that those are things, and more so which specific one you subscribe to is the fan theory.
Yeah.
Aspect of
Another fun one that we've discussed on the podcast is the one that popped up during the anime's run, and that's that Misato's the one that killed Kaji.
I do remember discussing that. I prefer our personal fan theory of Shinji's the one who shot Kaji, but Misato's also good.
Yeah, and I believe I mentioned at the time, but the reason this theory even started was because of how the episode was cut. It seemed to very imply that Misato was the one that shot him, because it goes from him dying to Misato being very upset as she gets home.
Yeah.
Whereas in other iterations, it's been made very clear, including the re-release of the anime, because this one falls more to a misconception, because Otto has been very clear, that was a goof on our part, Misato did not shoot Kaji.
Yeah. Not actually a thing that happened. It's just, Misato was upset before she knew about Kaji dying, that's all.
Yeah. And in the manga we just went through, we see, nameless agent, which could be Seele or NERV, but it's implied that Ritsuko was aware what was going to happen, because she also gives him a warning at one point.
Yeah.
But we never get a definitive who was responsible for Kaji's death. Except for in Rebuild, when it was Kaji.
Yeah, Kaji was absolutely responsible for Kaji's death in that one.
But I said, we in this house believe that Shinji is the responsible party.
100%.
He shot him and then strangled him.
Yeah. Crushed his chest like a tiny cat.
Yeah. Kaoru told me I had to do this. Who? Don't worry about it. This will make sense in 3 volumes. Here's a fun one that doesn't have an answer. But what is the soul inside Unit 0?
I don't think I personally for that one don't think there is a soul inside Unit 0. I think the reason Rei is able to pilot is the same reason that fucking Kaoru can pilot Unit 2 without even going inside Unit 2. Doesn't need to directly interact with the soul if he has the powers of an angel. Rei's just subconsciously using that to pilot Unit 0.
True, and the requirement of a soul also implies that all the MPEs had to have had souls placed in them. I think the one thing that probably works against it is that the machine goes berserk and targets Gendo.
That's true.
But some of the popular theories obviously have always been Naoko's one of the ones in there. Because I think at the very least, Rei doesn't need a compatible soul, because the same reason Kaoru doesn't need a compatible soul to pilot the Eva. So, Naoko, I think, is a possible good theory. We know that Unit 0 was being built around the time, and they kind of made breakthroughs with it, so... But at the same time, that also means that it happened after Yuri already fused herself on purpose, which means they would have had to known about it.
They would have to known about the fusing materials, and given how Naoko dies, would have means kind of had to, like, resuscitate her and then, like, put her into the Eva and intentionally fuse her soul.
Well, no, because a dead person can still be turned into the soul inside the Eva, because when it's turned to LCL, it's living and dead that are brought in.
That's true, but still, even if it's not Naoko surviving and doing it still feels like the rest of NERV or Giram, if they're still bad at the time, depending on what exactly
they
happens.
turned to NERV as soon as Naoko died.
Yeah, they would have to know that they're intentionally putting Naoko's soul.
Yeah, and I guess there is the possibility of a situation just of she died and Gendo's like, I can still use her. And
that does seem very on brand for Gendo now that you mention it.
Yeah, but she's one of the popular theories. I think it does fit narratively with a lot of things, but we never get definitive on it, obviously. Another popular theory is that it's a fragment of Rei.
Fair.
There's kind of 2 things for why this is the basis. So, Rei's already a fragmented body in a sense, because part of her is in the Evangelion series. There's the body that's walking around that is Rei. She's also Lilith, but Lilith's body is soulless. But the idea for this one is essentially that Rei's compatibility with Unit 0 and why no one else can use it is because it's Rei, who's an angel herself. Ultimately, that's why no one else can pilot Unit 0. But the reason that she's able to complete the ritual, in a sense, that Gendo wants to, is because after Unit 0 is destroyed, all of Lilith's soul is in one location. Which also is to kind of highlight how, during the resets we see of Rei, the only time she gets really aggressive reset, or Rei is aggressive in any aspect, is Rei 1 and Rei 3. So the idea is that after Rei 1 was killed,
part of her soul goes in Unit 0, and that's the more aggressive part of her soul.
Yeah.
And then after Unit 0 is destroyed and the soul comes back, that's when she starts being aggressive again.
Exactly.
I can see that. I still personally subscribe to there is no soul inside Unit 0, and the only reason she can pilot it is because of the angel stuff.
Yeah.
I can see why other people would make theories as to it.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely one of the mysteries of the series that hasn't been answered and probably will never be. But when it comes down to it, usually the 2 popular ones are it's Naoko or a fragment of Lilith.
Yeah. I can see
that. Another fun one that's debated is the episode 25 and 26 of the anime is also End of Evangelion.
That's the one where they go through the deconstructed art therapy?
Yeah, where Shinji's on the stage thing. And the idea for this one is that, effectively, everything happens as it did in End of Evangelion. But there's a part missing, which is, after instrumentality starts, then technically it's episode 24, the last 2 episodes of the anime, where Shinji goes through the instrumentality learning to love himself, and then it's the scene of him telling Rei this is what he wants, which then leads to the End of Evangelion beach scene.
Don't forget about the applause.
Yeah, congratulations. Part of the basis for this one, obviously, is that in the last 2 episodes, we see flashes of things that are in reality, which we see dead Misato where she dies, dead Ritsuko where she dies, and a few other things. So the implication is that Shinji seeing the glimpses of what already happened at the time of instrumentality in the storyline.
I can see that. I'm perfectly on board with that. Being accurate.
And it's one of those things, it doesn't
It
break
doesn't.
anything.
Yeah, it doesn't. It is not one of those theories that if you accept it, it changes things drastically. It's just it kind of tidies things up a little bit, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But beyond that, there's not a huge change if this theory is true versus false. So I see no reason to argue against it or for it.
Yeah, it's very clear that the events of the anime at the end are in instrumentality, but there's never a leaving of instrumentality.
Yeah.
So, End of Evangelion kind of wraps around it. But I think one of the other reasons people tend to push back against this one is because of how End of Evangelion is presented. Because, I don't know if you remember, but there's the 2 episode numbers. I forget it is, 25, 26?
Yeah, I think it's 35 6. And it has the, primes.
Yeah, and then, the movie uses the same number system for the 2 parts of the movie, thus implying, for a lot of people, that it's the replacement, because the ending was bad.
No, full disagree.
Yeah. Because a lot of people thought that the ending of the anime, misconception here, that the anime ending was the way it was because they had budget cuts, they weren't able to do it in time, a bunch of stuff, but no, that was never the case. The ending of the anime is fully as it was intended to be.
Yeah.
And then End of Evangelion was kind of, even planned at the time, they wanted to do End of Evangelion. But a lot of people also think they only did End of Evangelion because of the backlash, because of the ending of the anime. So it's like, okay, we'll do the End of Evangelion to appease everybody. Not the case either.
No.
End of Evangelion was planned, they had the ideas, they wanted to use them, they just never got the chance to in the anime. The anime was ended as what they fully intended to be, there was no budget cuts or production issues. It is how it was intended, and they got the chance to do both, which is great.
Good for them.
But I think it is that numbering thing of the movie presents itself as the last 2 episodes in the numbering for the titles of each part, which I think leads to the confusion and the misunderstanding that it's a replacement.
Yeah, my understanding, or how I choose to interpret it, is that the whole reason that it has those numbers on it is not to act as a replacement for episode 25 and 26, but more to make it clear, narratively, this is happening after episode 24, if you want to know what's happening in the physical world during the time of instrumentality. This is what it looks like outside. This is just instrumentality from another perspective.
Yeah, and we even discussed it when we finished the anime itself. The anime's ending is not focusing on Seele Gendo in its mentality.
No, it's focusing on
Shinji.
Shinji, yeah, what he's going through.
Yeah, the story ends with Shinji learning to love himself. That was the focus of the story all along. And then End of Evangelion is just kind of the lore ending of the story.
This is the ending for the plot that we're telling, and then this is the ending for the story that we're telling, which is not about the plot, it's about the character. Right.
Yeah. So with that, those are kind of like the more generally known. I think people even outside of Evangelion are going to get glimpses of. But let's dive into some of the deeper ones. This one is also kind of people looking inwards, but Neon Genesis Evangelion is religious propaganda. Is a popular one.
No, sure, that can be a thing people believe. But we also discussed this relatively early on in this podcast. It's not that Anno was trying to spread religious propaganda about angels or anything, or about the apocalypse. It was purely just, in Japan, they view Christian mythology the same way we look at a lot of Japanese mythology or Greek mythology.
I think Greek is the better example for, the Western audience type thing.
Yeah.
You play God of War, it's like, oh, this is a cool mythology story.
It's not Greek propaganda.
But you have to remember at the same time, Greek mythology was a religion that was followed at the time. And it's the same thing for most people in Japan. There's not a lot of Christians in Japan. They have their own religion. So when they look at the mythology, and you can see this even with older RPG games from Japan and all that stuff, they think, oh, that's a cool looking thing. I want to add it to my story. And that's ultimately what it was. It was aesthetic, not gospel.
Yeah.
And it's, when people name things like that, they want to, give meaning to, like, some names. So when the angels were named, it was to reflect, the aspect of that angel, and not so much, telling a story from the Bible is the best way to put it. Because a lot of people that are very adamant that, like, everything in Evangelion is specifically pulling from the Bible and telling Bible stories. Not really. There's a lot of homages because of the mythology aspect, but Anno's been very clear from the beginning that there's no religious context to his story.
Yeah.
Another one that was discussed a lot, and even now people tend to argue about if it's correct or not, and that's the correct definition of LCL, or what LCL stands for. Because there's only one thing that tells us what LCL is, and that is, in the manga, it identifies it as link connection liquid.
Disagree.
But then there's people that believe that it's supposed to be Lilith connection liquid.
So I had my own interpretation of what LCL stood for. I don't know if I ever said it on this podcast, but when it got referred to as, like, the primordial soup from which everything comes, or something like that, like, I believe that's a phrase Gendo or Kyutsuki uses to refer to LCL at one point. I came up with my own acronym for what LCL stood for, which was the Life Creation Liquid. That's wrong. That's not what it is. But that's what I'm standing by to this day, because I thought that at one point almost 2 years ago.
I mean, it fits. It fits very well.
Yeah.
But, we've only had it officially written in one thing. That was the manga and one of the dossiers that gives, like, facts about the series and definitions. And it's listed as link connection liquid.
Which makes sense. It's the liquid they put inside the entry plug so that you can properly link up with the fucking Ava.
Yeah. And there's still people that say, well, the manga's not canon, so it's not what it is. But, again, it's one of those situations where it being called link connection liquid in anything does not take away from any of the story aspect.
It changes nothing about the story. It's because, and you have to remember, LCL, or link connection liquid, if that's what it's called, is not an accurate description of exactly what it is narratively. It's what people in the universe call it, and they call it LCL, because for anyone who interacts with LCL who doesn't have a deeper understanding of what's going on in Evangelion, its sole purpose is to connect Avas to their pilots. So it would make sense that they would call it LCL, or Link Connection Liquid, and thus, in universe, it would be called that. That's all names are. Names are just the things we assign to them, because that's the best descriptor for it. Just because it seems like a bad descriptor from our perspective outside the universe, doesn't mean that that's not its name, because that's what it's being called in universe by people who only have the perspective of living inside that universe. Also, fuck you if you disagree. Fight me. Email me your address and I'll fight you.
It's been a while since this one came back.
The moment we start talking about fans and their beliefs, I get fighty. I don't know why.
This next one I think you're going to enjoy. But this theory is that first impact killed the dinosaurs.
No, I'm fully on board with that one. Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah. So, Lilith and Adam coming to Earth is ultimately what led to the extinction of the dinosaurs, which was the true inhabitants of the planet that were wiped from existence and aliens took over.
I'm going to make a small twist on this one, which is not accurate at all, but this is my own personal headcanon. It's, once again, not accurate at all.
Yeah.
There was more separation between Adam arriving and Lilith arriving. Dinosaurs were actually the first children of Adam, and then Lilith came crashing in and killed all the dinosaurs and sealed away Adam at the same time.
Those dinosaurs were immortal.
Yeah. If it wasn't for Lilith, they never would have died. But no, I'm fully on board with first impact killing the dinosaurs.
Yeah. It's one of those fun theories, like, there's nothing that really says that otherwise that was wrong, but it just adds an interesting layer to the story.
Yeah.
Especially with the whole alien aspect of, like, they've sent multiple of these seeds out into the universe, and they didn't give a fuck about where they were going.
Yeah, for sure.
With this one, a neat little fact note as well that in the textbook Shinji reads in one of the things, it refers to the first impact as the giant impact.
Yeah. Sure.
And it's the only reason they're referred to as the impacts, just to go back to that one, is because the cover-up story of what happened with the second impact was a meteor hit Antarctica, and not that science was done horribly wrong.
Yeah, no, it was... Sorry. It was a similar idea, or the cover-up they used was, it's the same thing that happened to the dinosaurs. Meteor impacted, but this one was slightly smaller and didn't kill us.
Yeah, so the reason it's referred to as second impact is because in this world, effectively, they are counting, much like we do with the World Wars, every, ecological change caused by a meteor impact.
Yeah.
So the first one wiped out the dinosaurs and terraformed most of what the Earth is now, as well as creating one of the moons.
Sorry, I love that explanation because when Seele goes to JSSDF, it's like, hey, Gendo's trying to trigger third impact. Most of the low-level soldiers are just like, Gendo's trying to get another meteor to hit Earth? How? What?
They've all played Final Fantasy VII, so they know what the deal is.
Yeah, he's about to cast the spell Meteor.
Yeah. But this time the live stream was not there to catch it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we all became the live stream.
That's very funny to me. Like, I had never thought of that before. But Seele using the line of Gendo's trying to trigger third impact, from my perspective, it's like, yeah, we understand what third impact means. But to the rank and file soldier in the universe, that makes no sense of a claim.
Yep, that's one of the big problems I think overall, and is it forgets its own censorship to the public.
Yeah,
that the terms are used very openly. It's like, would the public know this though?
Yeah, would they understand what you're claiming right now?
Yeah, but yeah, every time the word impact is used, it's in reference to a meteorite as part of the cover-up of what happened in the real second impact in the year 2000.
Yeah. Makes sense.
This was another interesting one that kids born after the second impact have no souls.
I don't...
So this one seems to stem from... I don't know if you remember this, but it's talked about when the gates of Guff were opened, when they were doing the experiments after second impact. It was empty, except for Lilith. So the idea that this came from was after second impact triggered, there was no more souls, which means every child born wouldn't have been getting a soul from a Guff. Thus, every child after the second impact is soulless, which is used to explain why there's a low birth rate in the world. Not the fact that there was a giant shake-up ecologically, and these are kids born to parents during the events of the year 2000, essentially.
Is this from Rebuild where they talk about the Gates of Guff, or is this in other ones as well?
The anime also discusses it with the whole Rey revelation, because they opened the Gates of Guff, and there was only one soul, and that was the soul that was used to make Rey.
Okay.
And then we found out that was Lilith's soul.
This is fitting more and more into my Out There theory that I'm going to share with you.
Okay. But it's one of those interesting ones where you don't really think about it because it was like a non-thing at the time because there was bigger things going on.
Yeah.
But then you start sitting down and think, it's like, it was empty. Where are all these new people coming from?
Yeah.
This is a fun one. And it's... I say this falls more into a misconception because there's no way this can be true. But the idea is that the Spear of Longinus is the actual holy Spear of Longinus. It just got really big.
That application actually goes backwards because our understanding is it was originally used for the Avas in there, or not Avas, the...
Well, no, that's the thing. It's confirmed later on that these were sent on the moon.
Exactly. So that doesn't mean it got big. That means it got small enough to be used instead of Jesus, and then got big again.
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
Yeah. And I think this falls kind of in, the people believe, the religious symbolism is real in Evangelion. So, of course, the Spear of Longinus has to be the literal Spear of Longinus from Christian mythology, and not, it's just another thing.
Yeah, it has the only possible explanation if you believe this is biblical propaganda.
Well, the one thing that is made very clear is that the Dead Sea Scrolls did not name these things. It just said this was going to happen.
Yeah.
So, the Spear of Longinus name given to the spears are not the actual names of them that were given by the first ancestral race, which has very little to do with the story. We don't know what they were calling these things. All the names are names given to them by humans.
Yeah.
they specifically even name the angels as they appear in the anime.
Yeah.
They're not like, oh, Gaegyo's going to be the next one popping up. It appears, and they assign it a name as a code name. So a lot of the religious things in universe explanation is just they're assigned code names.
Which implies that the universe, or the story isn't actually biblical literalism, or like some sort of like trying to tell a biblical propaganda story. It just implies that there's one guy in universe who's in charge of naming things, and he's a huge Bible nerd.
Yes. It'd be like you get a boat and you name it the Odysseus.
Yeah. They've had a spear, he's like, oh, this spear's big enough to spear God. I know a spear that speared God. The spear of Longinus. This is the spear of Longinus.
Was it wielded by a man named Longinus? Fuck you. Shut up.
This is the first man. We're calling him Adam. He wasn't actually, technically our species didn't come from him. He has nothing to do with humankind. Fuck you. It's already been named that. He's the first man. He's Adam.
Yeah. And this is one I think the idea popped up early before we got the actual explanation of what's going on with the spears. And that's why I think this one is never going to be considered like this is what happened.
Yeah.
There are some people who believe that an AT field is a real-life psychological term.
Sure. In what sense?
As in that... Because they use a lot of real psychological terms throughout Neon Genesis, so there was a period where people thought an AT field was an actual, legitimate scientific field thing.
Of course. Thank God it's not.
Yeah. This is more... I guess this one's less of a misconception about Neon Genesis, but a misconception about what's being said in Neon Genesis.
Yeah.
Because, Hedgehog's Dilemma is an actual concept. So people thought the concept of an AT field is like a physical barrier that is used to separate oneself from another is the thing. But I think in my, university psychology information, it's a bit rusty at this point. But I think that's just the ego in psychological terms.
Yeah.
Is what separates you from another person.
Yeah, technically, ego is kind of your sense of self, so you could argue that's how you separate yourself.
Yeah, but people thought there was an actual, concept known as the absolute terror field in psychology that was used to explain the separation of one individual from another.
I'm going to be honest. If Sigmund Freud, instead of calling it the ego, referred to that portion of the psyche as the absolute terror field, a lot more edgy teens would have gotten into psychology.
That's true.
Oh, Mom, Dad, you're encroaching on my absolute terror field.
And that's not cool.
Well, do you have any other theories you'd like to share?
This one's kind of going back to one we discussed, but it's the idea that someone we know is responsible for Kaji's death and not a nameless figure. Obviously, there was the Misato shot aspect.
There's also Cat Lady, if I remember correctly, was one of the potential
his contact that he was using.
Anyone talk about the real theory of Shinji being the killer?
Well, there's also the idea that Gendo did it himself, or that Ritsuko also did it herself, is two of the other spin-off ideas. But I feel like this one kind of... You can eliminate Ritsuko.
Yes.
Because Ritsuko got the phone call and was advised about it, and her response wasn't oh yeah, he's dead. She wasn't the one giving information that he was dead. She was receiving the information it was done.
Yeah.
Gendo, I don't think, would get his hands dirty in the situation.
No. I think he would consider that below him.
Yeah, in fact, we never get a confirmation on which side had him killed, but in my understanding of it, I think Gendo still would have saw Kaji as an asset at this point.
Yes.
Especially where, in most of these versions, Kaji had sided with Gendo.
Yeah. I can see that.
So I think it was just nameless Sile grunt that did it.
I still think it's Shinji, but I can accept nameless Sile grunt as a fallback.
Maybe he works for Sile. Yeah. They also don't give him a name, because they'll follow Gendo's rules sometimes.
Yeah. That's the one thing Sile and Gendo agrees on.
This was a misconception in the story originally, but it's that Rei and Kaoru are albinos.
Sure.
Now, it wasn't that they weren't angels as well, but the idea was that mixing angel DNA with human physiology would make an albino.
That's some, ever so subtly, racist beliefs getting in there. Of, the closer you are to God, the whiter you are.
Also, if that's the way they would have went with it, that would have been some like interesting implications for like the existence of albinos in general.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's because they are angels more so than they are human, even though humans are angels.
Yeah.
And this is one that's we never got an explanation on why they are pale with the red eyes. I think it's an aesthetic choice to differentiate them from other humans because they are Adam and Lilith ultimately.
Yeah, I interpret it as it's less so to make them different from other humans, and more so when you first see Kaoru, you want to be able to say he's like Rei and not necessarily know why. So you have to make him look similar enough to Rei, but also make Rei look distinct enough from humans that you're not just going to say he's another person.
Yeah, they're supposed to have another worldly look to them.
Yeah, they're specifically supposed to look like each other in a way that makes them different from other humans.
Yeah, and again, End of Evangelion kind of disproves this idea as well because it's not mixing human and angel DNA because human DNA is angel DNA.
Yeah.
It's just Adam and Lilith DNA is the dividing factor here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one's considered more of a Mandela effect one, and that's that Toji lost his leg and his arm.
Oh, because they remember it as him losing his arm even though he only ever lost his
Yeah,
leg.
which I was remembering, I could have swore it was mentioned in the anime that he lost his arm as well. But when you go back, he's always got his arm. There's never a version that he doesn't have his arm. So I don't know where it came from.
Same place.
And it is
Mandela
possible that maybe
died.
the original dub had something mention an arm.
Yeah.
But yeah, most things will just say he had his leg severed below the knee.
Classic chompy chompies. I'm referring to the fact that Unit 1 bit the entry plug and thus bit off his leg. Chompy chompies.
Now this is a fun theory that I think can go either way. I don't really have a strong opinion on it, but it fits within the world. And this involves Naoko again. So much like people say Naoko's soul is in Unit 0, there's an idea that Naoko is still alive, but she's been transplanted into the Magi system. Either her soul was moved over, or as she was dying, Gendo had her brain hooked up to the device.
Yeah, that's one of those ones where I can accept it because it doesn't make a huge difference on the plot. It arguably better explains the whole ending where Magi sides with Gendo against Ritsuko.
Yeah, it makes it more poignant if it is Naoko in there that actually chose Gendo over her daughter.
Yeah.
Part of the thing that builds onto this is in End of Evangelion, when Ritsuko's inside the thing, it looks like she's hooked into a brain.
Fair.
But there's definitely a lot of people that do believe that in some aspect, Naoko was transferred into the Magi system and didn't just die there.
I can see both sides. I can see how it makes things a bit tighter and isn't egregious of a thing to believe in. And I can also see why people would argue against it. Because it doesn't add anything crazy to the story.
Especially something that wasn't followed up on.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't even like a hint that was what was going on. It was more circumstantial evidence led to the idea that this is how it was going. But we never saw anything that suggested the Magi system changed after Naoko's death as well, right?
Yeah, so that's why I am willing to accept it because I don't see anything egregious with it, but can also understand why people would be opposed to this theory.
Yeah. It's just one of those ones that's like, oh, that's a fun thing to think about, like the implications of the story if Naoko is alive and has decision-making capacity within the Magi system.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one about Keel. Keel Lorenz, the head of Seele.
Yep.
And the idea, I think, started before other Keel stuff came to light in other spin-offs, which we haven't gone through yet. But it is believed that Keel is actually an immortal who's been wanting the world for years.
So what you're saying is he's kind of like a dinosaur.
Quite possibly. The idea is has like a level of immortality, and that's why he's the head of Seele. He's probably the founder of Seele, and everything he's been doing is to fulfill a prophecy in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, I can see some evidence for this where he talks about how humanity keeps trying to destroy itself, and that's why Seele exists, because they want to save humanity from itself, that sort of thing. So I could see that being the opinion of someone who has been around long enough to have seen humanity keep pulling this dumb shit and want to intervene. I can see some level of explanation for that.
Yeah, and it's also, I think this happened with Keel because he's a character that we don't really get a lot of information on.
He is a very open book in that nothing has been printed into the book yet.
Yeah. And I think the failings of this one is we had, well, first off, we find out that Keel is mainly kept alive by robotics.
Yeah.
After instrumentality.
Not a thing that would be...
So, them being older than they are, I do 100% believe. I think they are a much older than they appear to be. But I think that's due to science and technology, and not so much Keel just as an immortal being.
Yeah.
Which is why we see the mechanical parts left behind after instrumentality and Evangelion. But on top of that, we see Keel age.
Do we?
We see a younger Keel. Remember in the flashback episodes where it's Gendo's in the background? Well, Keel's with him, and he's a much younger Keel.
It's true. We do see a younger Keel.
Keel and Gendo were working together before Impact happened, as we find out from the tapes when they're discovered as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
So, definitely, I think Seele has been playing with the concept of immortality and how they can extend human life. I don't think he's an immortal being that's been there since the beginning of time.
I would even accept that immortality was their first plan. Like, not he is immortality, but they were striving towards immortality before instrumentality, and then when immortality didn't work out for them, they pivoted towards instrumentality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be willing to accept that, but yeah. I don't agree with him actually being an immortal being who's been around for all of civilization and has founded Seele to take direct intervention.
Yeah, and on that idea, there is an interesting aspect to Keel which gets revealed in the anime light novel series. So Anima is kind of a sequel to End of Evangelion. Actually, it's probably close to the manga, but essentially Anima is a world where the events of End of Evangelion happened, but instrumentality was never triggered. So, in this world, Shinji fought off the MPEs with Asuka, nothing happened of it, Gendo was stopped before he triggered Impact, and has gone missing.
Okay.
Also, Kaji never died.
Classic. Except, no, not classic, the opposite. New and original.
But that's the setup for the Anima world, and we get some interesting stuff about Keel and some aspects about him that I think also lead into this idea.
Fair.
This one is probably a misunderstanding or a mistranslation, but the belief is that the dummy plug plant, so the spot where we see Rei floating in the LCL, is the Chamber of Guff.
Yep, I'm pretty confident that's just a misunderstanding.
And I think this the place is set up to look like a brain for obvious reasons, but it's also where Ritsuko reveals the aspect of the Chamber of Guff only had one soul in it was Rei. So I think it's either because all that information about Guff is presented here, or due to a misunderstanding of when Guff appears actually later. I think it's just people misunderstanding what was provided.
Yeah.
Because Guff is inside the Black Moon. Although technically it's a separate world, as we found out in Rebuild. But the axis is through the eggs.
Yeah.
Another aspect, and this is an interesting one to think about, but information we get is kind of contradicting, but it's not confirmed information, is the best way to put it. And that's when Lilith and Adam arrived on Earth, what we got information-wise is that in order to make sure both beings of life and beings of knowledge do not coexist on the same planet, making a godlike being, they have the spears to seal themselves if they do end up on the same planet. So Lilith was supposed to seal herself when she got to Earth, but her spear was destroyed, so Adam had been sealing himself.
Yeah.
The theory is that Lilith actually sealed Adam so that she would live.
Like she intentionally went out of her way to seal him so she...
Yeah, so it wasn't Adam impaled himself, she impaled Adam and left him in Antarctica, is the idea. It's an interesting way to think about it, There's nothing that tells us in the story that this is what happened, or even suggests this is what happened.
Yeah.
Because Kaoru is the soul of Adam, and he's not like he hates Lilins, but it never comes off as like this bitch put me in sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another one of those ones of it might as well be true because I don't feel like it changes anything drastically.
Yeah, and as I said, there are contradictions to this idea in that Lilith is still in the black egg.
Yeah.
And when they fully awaken her, it lifts the black egg up. So she never left. Why would she return back to the black egg is the idea. Because it's implied, it never stated though, that when she crashed and Adam sealed himself because she didn't, then life form started oozing out of the black egg, essentially. The LCM.
Yeah.
So it seems like Lilith was never truly conscious until end of Evangelion.
Yeah.
But it's a fun idea to think of them fighting to determine their species. And
the Evangelion prequel no one asked for. Just Lilith and Adam having a spear battle to impale each other.
Plus, on top of that, why would Lilith just stop at sealing Adam?
Yeah, why wouldn't she fully destroy him?
Yeah. Here's an interesting idea. The string quartet scene in Death and Rebirth is canon.
Which, the one where they're playing instruments during instrumentality?
Death and Rebirth is the movie between the ending and it was kind of like the recap of the story, which added some new context in.
Right.
And between these scenes of the flashbacks, it's them doing a string quartet, which is Asuka, Rei, Kaoru, and Shinji. But obviously, through the anime, we know it can't be because, well, even in any version, because Kaoru and Asuka never really share.
Yeah, they never really coexist as
the closest we get is in the manga, which he has her last fight and has the mental break the day Kaoru shows up.
Yeah.
So they have the back and forth in the bathroom, and that's about it. But the story, like, people are like, it's canon, but it doesn't really fit anywhere in the story that it's telling. Because obviously, where it's the movie recapping the TV show, it would have to be to the TV show canon. But Kaoru's only there for one episode, and by the time this happens, we already have Rei 3
yeah.
and Asuka's in a coma.
Classic Asuka, entering left and right.
I suppose that you could interpret it as it is instrumentality, possibly.
It's instrumentality in a literal sense, because they're playing instruments.
True. Now, this is a fun one that you might have heard at some point. But End of Evangelion was Anno's revenge against the fans for their negative response to the TV show.
I did hear that one.
Yeah.
And I agree. Anno got mad at the fans. He's like, oh, you want a fucking action ending that explains plot? Well, fuck you. Here you go.
Everybody's dead. Now, as this one is a widely believed idea, kind of in the same vein as the ending of the anime was due to budget reasons. All people believe this is the case, that Anno was pretty much a big fuck you to all the fans who were angry at it. But again, the concepts used in End of Evangelion were already present
Yes.
in the ending of the anime, as we saw flashes to it. They wanted to do End of Evangelion, but they weren't able to get to it.
Yeah.
So when the Evangelion series was greenlit to do End of Evangelion, they used those concepts.
Exactly.
There might have been some tweaks to the story from what they originally had planned, but we do know, as of the anime ending, Ritsuko and Misato were dead.
Yeah.
Or had died before instrumentality triggered. And we didn't know exactly what instrumentality was.
Other than it was Anno's way of getting back at those fans.
Exactly. Now, I would say, at the very least, it was probably both of these concepts were made in tandem.
Yeah.
And they just cut out one side of the story, so we only got the instrumentality stuff.
Yeah, I would be more willing to believe that they had originally essentially written hour-long episodes for both 25 and 26 that had both of them, and essentially cut it down by taking out End of Evangelion.
Yeah. I'm not saying it was cut for any reason, but I feel that they had to have had the other side of what was going on in reality planned out already.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
But because there was a very negative context to End of Evangelion for like how it ends for a lot of characters, and the very overt "go the fuck outside, you degenerates" aspect of the story. Because where the anime had the more subtle way of telling you the story of, accept reality, interact. You can't just wall yourself off and hide your fantasy. The end of Evangelion story was a lot more overt about that concept.
Yeah.
Even having the famous real-world scenes where the characters, or the actors, voice actors, were dressed up as the characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, Anno had no anger towards the fans that he's like, I'm going to take this out on them through End of Evangelion.
He had no anger that he admits he had to his fans. He might have had a secret, deep-seated anger.
It's the funny thing, because I think most people, if you ask them, like, today, End of Evangelion is probably, like, up there in their rankings of how much they like it, like, certain things from the Evangelion universe.
Well, that's because they've seen the other content that comes from Evangelion. They're like, oh, there is no such thing as a truly happy ending. This is fine. This is what I get.
Yeah, it's just that humorous thing of, like, at the time, people were like, oh, Anno's doing this to spite us because he is angry.
Well,
and it's like, it's the best Evangelion was ever existed. There's also, part of it is because, I don't remember End of Evangelion that well, but there's also the flashes of the hate mail that comes up on the screen.
Yes, I do remember that.
I think that was also part of why people think that was the specific goal of it, but it was more, and this is mainly my interpretation of it, but I think the hate mail was to exemplify that, like, escaping into fantasy, to the point that people would write hate mail was the point he was making, and not so much, these are the specific people that ruined Evangelion for me.
These people are the ones that ruined my beautiful art. No, it's more so getting this deep into something that you care this passionately about it is what I'm trying to prevent it from happening.
Yeah. You got so angry about a fictional storyline that you sent death threats to people because they didn't do the story the way you wanted it to be.
Yeah. And just for that, I'm killing Misato, even though I already suggested I was killing Misato.
So, another interesting one here is that the MPEs don't have souls, is an aspect. Now, this kind of is going back to the Naoko thing we discussed, with her being in Unit 0 and the MPs. Obviously, they're controlled by... the MPs are dubbing blood control. But this is more of a argument happening because of something Kaoru says in the story. Because he's the person who gives us the definition of what the AT field is. Which is, it's the light of the soul that separates you from the others.
Yeah.
So the idea is that in order to have an AT field, you must have a soul. MPs have AT fields, which is why they're able to damage the Evangelions. And Unit 0 also is able to generate an AT field. But Kaoru's also able to generate an AT field around him, so Rei being in Unit 0, it could just be her AT field. But the argument is, are there souls in the MPs?
Once again, I'm on the side of, no, I don't think there's souls in them. Mostly because of the nature of mass producing something. It doesn't really work if you have to find a person to sacrifice each and every time.
Mass production is a soulless thing.
It is a very soulless activity. So I feel weird about the idea that the MPs all have souls in them and they had to specifically select someone who each of the members of Sealy could potentially bond with. So I don't know. Maybe this is another one of those ones where if Anno came out tomorrow and said, yeah, the MPs have souls. These are the social security numbers of the people whose souls went into the MPs. No part of me would be like upset about that change, but at the same time, I stand firmly on the side of they don't have souls.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to we didn't specifically see them activate an AT field the way the Evas have.
Yeah.
On top of that, their main thing is not, oh, you can't hit me. It's, I'm just going to regenerate back.
Yeah.
And for breaking through the AT field, they have replica Spear of Longinus's, which one of them fucked up Asuka and pierced her AT field. So I think that's the reason they get through the AT field. It's because they have a replica of the thing that's supposed to destroy AT fields.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do fall on the side I don't think they have souls in them. And also, it's confirmed that the idea initially was that Sealy was going to transfer their souls into the MPs, the Evangelion series, for their own level of immortality. And if there's a soul inside it already, it kind of defeats the purpose.
Exactly.
Another fun one here. All of the things from episodes 25 and 26, the instrumentality aspect, was all in Shinji's head, and it was happening during the time when, Shinji's kind of like somewhat comatose and not really paying attention, and it's like, I don't want to do anything, he's being dragged around by Misato. Those episodes are happening in his head at that moment.
Okay. Sure, why not? I disagree, but sure, why not?
Yeah, and I guess the problem with this is it doesn't match up with his reaction, because it would be, Shinji would obviously be snapping out of it at the time he's getting an Ava 1, but him having a revelation about I can love myself doesn't fit up with the Shinji we have in that moment.
No, he does not start loving himself yet.
Yeah. So I feel like if you have to put them together in any aspect, that stuff has to happen after instrumentality is triggered. Not before.
It's while he's in the sea of... That also explains why he has so many other people's, thoughts at that time.
This other one, these are two theories that have to do with the ending of End of Evangelion, with Asuka on the beach. The first aspect of this is that Asuka didn't die and wasn't pulled in instrumentality. So when she gets beat the fuck up by the MPs, we suspect that she has died because they're ripping it apart and eating it. Which Shinji also sees and has this breakdown moment, and then gets pulled in instrumentality. But the next time we see Asuka, she's got an eye patch over the eye, and the arm that was shredded up is bandaged up. So the way this theory goes is that everyone got pulled in instrumentality except for Asuka, who then had to find bandages and bandaged herself up. And I guess, to be fair, in this theory, I can see why Asuka is
would choke the shit out of Shinji?
No, Shinji chokes her.
Oh, right, yeah.
But she just doesn't give a fuck about anything.
Yeah. Why she would just be so apathetic.
Yep.
Refer to him as disgusting.
Of course, this also ignores the fact that in instrumentality, he strangles Asuka.
Yeah.
Who calls him on his bullshit.
Can't please everyone.
Yeah.
She was both pulled into instrumentality and not pulled into instrumentality.
Well, and this is ultimately the thing to realize, they were all pulled into instrumentality during the coup, correct?
Yes.
When we see Shinji come out of instrumentality, he's in his clothes again.
Yes.
So I'd have to assume that they manifest what they believe they're supposed to look like, and I think Asuka believes I was badly fucking injured, and that's why she's bandaged up.
Yeah.
I think it's more of her perception of herself, much like Shinji perceives himself in his school clothes because that's his main outfit.
Yeah.
And that's why Asuka's in her plug suit, but also bandaged up.
Because she imagines herself both primarily as an able pilot, but also as damaged.
Yeah.
Oh shit, damaged.
On top of that, the other theory about Asuka at the end of Evangelion, which this one has been confirmed is incorrect, is that she was made by Shinji, but it wasn't just Asuka, that the manifestation was actually a combination of Rei, Asuka, and Misato.
That's just dumb. I don't like that. I'm mad at whoever came up with that theory. Send me your address via email so I can fight you.
This was the theory when the movie came out.
Yeah.
That Shinji created the essentially perfect woman.
And the perfect woman in his mind was mentally a combination of Asuka, Misato, and Rei, but physically just Asuka.
Well, the idea is that the Asuka at the end has physical characteristics of all three of them.
Oh, the bandages are Rei, of course. That's so dumb. The thing I like most about Rei is that she's regularly injured. Oh god, that's so dumb.
Yeah. And especially in, I could see in the hype of the moment. Like, oh, was that what that was? Because you're seeing it in the theater.
Yeah.
You see it briefly, and then you leave the theater.
You see it for a couple moments, you have your conversation with your best buds on your trip home from the theater, and you're like, oh my god, you saw Asuka, right? She had bandages. Those are just like Ray's bandages. Do you think maybe there was a little bit of Ray in there, and like Shinji created her so he could have a perfect wife to start the world over with?
Because the idea is that Shinji is God at the end, was the theory.
Yeah.
So, if Shinji has all this godlike power, then, yeah, he created a companion, thus kind of doing the ultimate, Adam and Eve ending story type.
Yeah.
For like the symbology of it. But the fact that it was a prevalent theory that lasted for some time is like, oh.
Oh god, you guys are dumb. To be fair, I've always heard that people who like Evangelion are dumb. And you know what? To abstract it to an extra level, people who like a podcast all about Evangelion, they're the coolest people on Earth, actually.
But yeah, I already kind of also briefly mentioned another one, which is people think Shinji is essentially the god of this world.
Yep.
Which means he controls what everything is. And that was even a theory going into Rebuild with what we were seeing about it being a restart, that Shinji was going to actively himself restart the timeline, which is why that Shinji also acted different in certain scenes. And it was like, what level of understanding does he have? But he was still the god who created this world. But later clarification indicated Shinji never had god powers. The person with the god powers was doing what Shinji asked.
Yeah. Which leads into that crazy theory I was telling you I had earlier, which is essentially that if we choose to accept the loop theory of it's all loops, and also the manga was the first loop, that Shinji is indirectly the reason or responsible for the fact that there are loops, is that initially it was just going to play out a single timeline in the manga, and then it would end and it would be over. But when Shinji had the not Shinji had the godlike power, but being with godlike power was letting Shinji make the choices, and Shinji essentially had the overarching desire of protect humanity, and more specifically, protect these specific humans who I care about. Essentially, humanity is going to end at some point eventually. Maybe not soon, but eventually humanity will come to an end. Prepare yourself for it if you must. And essentially, the moment that happened, Shinji's wish then took effect, and it just immediately started time back over so we could get humans again. And thus, Shinji is responsible for all of those. That is my theory. I'll workshop it a bit in a week's time when we do next episode. It would explain why Kaoru was so obsessed with Shinji. If Kaoru has an understanding of from outside the loops are happening, and if he just somehow intrinsically knew it was Shinji's wish that caused the loops to happen, that's why he's so obsessed with making Shinji happy, because the last time Shinji was extremely unhappy, he constructively changed the universe forever.
Yeah. Here's another fun one. Asuka's tsundere.
Yes and no, and also fuck you.
I would not classify Asuka as a tsundere.
I wouldn't either. The only...
she definitely has traits that I can see why that mistake would be made, but ultimately, she doesn't behave like one in the truest sense.
Yeah, she has moments where her behavior seems similar to them, which is why I said yes and no.
Under this argument, Shinji is also tsundere if Asuka is.
Yes. Yeah.
Literally, the problem... she's an aggressive person who just can't explain her feelings. I don't think she is jealous that Shinji's interacting with the other people. I think it's literally she just doesn't know how to express herself to Shinji, her feelings about Shinji.
Yep. Arguably, if we're accepting Asuka as tsundere, then yes, I agree, Shinji is also tsundere by that same logic. And in certain of the timelines, Rei is also tsundere. And once we start getting to the point of every one of the main characters is tsundere, that's where we get to the point where I just say, fuck you. I disagree. Also, just to go back a little bit, where I tell people to email me their address so I can come fight them, just make sure you send that email to fightingevangelion@gmail.com, setting up an email specifically for fighting the fans of this podcast.
So we're at the point where I have one last theory to go over, and this one I think falls into just how vague Thrice Upon a Time was about the timeline in the gap. And there is a belief that near Third Impact and Third Impact are the same thing, or they're separate things. There's a big argument about what is the case.
I choose to believe they're separate things.
Yeah, so we see near Third Impact.
Yeah, it's when Shinji is essentially starting Third Impact just to pull Rei out of Unit 1.
Yeah. And during this, it gets sealed, which stops it. That's why it's dubbed the Near Third Impact.
Because it didn't actually Third Impact.
Third Impact is a bit weird.
Yes.
because it starts and begins very far apart. Because we see the end of Third Impact when Shinji's trying to fix everything.
Yes.
But we also know that Kaji sacrificed himself to stop the Third Impact.
Yes. Which happens medium in the fucking time gap that happens.
Yes. So I think they are separate events purely because we know that Wheelay has the rebellion at a later date that clearly wasn't right after Shinji just did the thing. Because Shinji also has to get sent to space at some point in here. And Kaji sacrificed himself to stop it, but we know it was already stopped because Kawa put the spirit through.
Yes.
So from that alone, we know that Kaji, a founder of Wheelay who rebelled against them, sacrificed themselves to stop the impact, which just doesn't line up timeline-wise if it happened immediately after Shinji got sealed within Unit 1.
Yeah. Times are fucked. It doesn't make sense if they're the same.
Yeah.
I understand they're vagabond, and I can see why people would come to that conclusion, but it just doesn't work out, and that's the correct answer.
Yeah. With that, that wraps up the last theory I had for today.
Fair enough.
So you get the teasing about your off-the-wall theory?
Oh, no, that was it. It was that Shinji is responsible for this.
Oh.
Shinji himself in the manga triggers the when he triggers Third Impact, his wish to protect humanity is what causes all of the loops to happen after that fact.
Fair enough. Well, if there was a theory that you'd like more depth on that you feel like we didn't go over in this episode, of course, send us a message, reach out. We'll tag it on to another episode when we have the chance to go over it in a bit more detail.
Or if it's a meaty enough theory, we'll make a whole episode about it.
Exactly. But I think it's time to wrap up this episode now. So, of course, if you'd like to send us a message, you can send it to whatismypodcastabout@gmail.com. On top of that, we also release these episodes every Wednesday on all podcasting platforms as well as YouTube. Like, favorite, subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend. Word of mouth is best for spreading podcasts to new people. On top of that, we also have an Instagram page, Farewell Evangelion, where we update it with tidbits and aspects about the series as we go through, keeping it to about where we're at in the story as we go through it, so you don't have to worry about spoilers if you're following along for the first time. And as always, Peter, what can we expect on the next episode of Farewell Evangelion?
Next time on Farewell Evangelion, I am taking over this podcast with an iron fist, and I will explain the lore of Evangelion and give you all of the facts of what's going on in this universe.
And hopefully plenty of fan service.
No fan service, only facts.